Hey guys, I am DM Zone. This is Gamer's Oasis. Let's get into it. Okay, in this video, I'm going to dive deep into the stats, talk beyond the original 1974 Dungeons & Dragons game that came out. I've already made a video talking about those stats, so I'm not going to go into that a whole lot here. But I am going to start off in a book that I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time in this video because I'm going to be making a video on this article itself. This one is in Dragon Magazine number 3, page number 7 in October 1976. Right in the middle of all these supplements being released, and in the time when the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Monster Manual, the first book of that series, came out. There was a very controversial topic that was dropped into this. Now I'm only going to dip my toe into this, and I'm not going to go too far into it. But the article is titled, Notes on Women and Magic and Their Beauty. Okay, now it's a little bit of a paraphrase. I'll get to the rest of this in a second. The article explores the concept of gender and alignment that goes directly into the game. Now, I want to go into this. I do not support, I'm not comfortable with this, not the mechanic of it per se, just the stale air and the misogynistic nature that seems to be with it. I'll start with the full title so I can get into what I mean with that, which is bringing the staffed gamer into D&D. Now, I've looked into what the staff means a little bit. It's a tool used, with certain things and that type of stuff, but it's also apparently a colonial term for women's work. So bringing the women's work gamer into D&D sounds like a terrible way. How anyone would write that and think they're going to be attracting female audiences to the game, I don't know. Certainly you wouldn't attract my wife or daughters with that. They'd be too repulsed by this. But like I said, I'm not going to get into that too much. The beauty stat interacts with fighters, magic users, and thieves, clerics differently. I'm going to make a whole video diving into that. Again, I just want to acknowledge the existence of this stat for completion so people know that I'm talking about more than just supplement 1 at this point in time. Okay, also, like I've said, I've already done a video talking about the 1974 stats, and how they work together with a relationship with chainmail and that type of stuff. So I'm not going to go into those videos either. Those videos are already out. You can find those on my channel. Now that the basics are understood, or I've at least directed you to the right place, let's dive deeper into what makes these stats exceptional. The term exceptional was used in this book to talk about the changes that were made to the basic stats. Sometimes certain classes could access the exceptional nature of these stats more than the other classes. And in this, I'm talking about the core 4 basic classes now. So you have the fighter, magic user, cleric, and now with the addition of the thief, that makes the 4 basic classes that this would be referring to. I also feel like it's important to say this is not based around men or women. To gain access to the exceptional stats in supplement 1 Greyhawk, it is merely about what class you are, for a little bit of class balancing that was trying to be done at this point in time to bring certain things more into balance. You'll see what I'm saying as we go. I also feel like I need to give one more disclaimer and say this was the first time we had Tim Cass on the crew. He didn't edit this book in particular. He was working on a different one, Supplement 2 Blackmore, which came from Dave Arneson as a bunch of loose notes. I'm going to be doing a whole video talking about that specifically, but you can still see his influence over the 1974 core books that we all know and love. You can see the improvement by a clear mile. However, he's not directly related in a lot of the editing of this book yet. So let's get into the determination of abilities as it is stated in Supplement 1. First off, let's go ahead and talk about the increased level ranges for what we call the demi-humans, the dwarves, half-elves, elves, and that type of stuff, halflings. For example, a dwarf with a 17 or an 18 prime requisite, aka their strength, would have their strength increased by 1 or 2, thus making a fighter with a 17 strength be able to reach a 7th level fighter and an 18 strength be able to reach an 8th level fighter, changing them from Myrmidon max level to champion or the legendary superhero that is usually reserved for only fighter types. While these level changes are seen across all the prime requisites for all the different classes, is more generally a social or emotional impactful thing than it is actually a better thing, though with certain classes like the cleric and magic user, there is the addition of 1 or 2 levels that unlocks new spells with higher levels or more spells because they have these levels, making it more important in a big way for them. So, strength in Supplement 1 had probably the most iconic, noticeable difference, known as the percentile strength for fighters. Most believe that this came from Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and I certainly would put myself in that category when I started. But it came out in Supplement 1, Greyhawk. The improvement was actually great for all classes. So beyond the prime requisite additional bonuses, it gained 4 new stats. It allowed all classes now to get bonuses like that of an ogre from the 1974 rules. There was the hit probability, which I classically or typically would just refer to as the to hit. There's the damage, which I refer to as the to damage when I'm writing these notes down. There's weight allowed static bonus to encumbrance, and there is a continuation or modification to the open doors. These are all very welcome changes to anyone with moderate or better strength, regardless of what class they are. These are also extremely straightforward in improving the bonuses you would expect. There is a little bit of a class balance, class-specific part to this. It doesn't necessarily relate to real world. For example, a fighter or a thief of the same strength probably should get the same bonuses. However, once you get into the percentile strengths, that is reserved for fighter only. This percentile strength has far greater benefits in each one of these 4 areas. For example, hit probability goes to a massive +4 versus a +2 for non-fighter. Damage goes to incredible +6 versus a +3. Weight allowed goes to a tremendous +1200 encumbrance versus 500 encumbrance. And an unstoppable 6 or less to open doors, which literally means you cannot fail versus a 5 in 6 chance. So literally you only fail on a 6. 1 through 5 you succeed. Also, and specifically only for fighters, there is open magically sealed doors by things like Hold Portal and Wizard Lock. As I've said a couple times, this is generally expressed as percentile strength. My first encounter with this was with a dwarf fighter I named Zon, Z-O-N, who was made in 1989. He was a gladiator in AD&D 2nd edition with spiked armor, specialized daggers, and that type of stuff. I did roll an 18 strength on him. Now, we were using 4d6 keep the highest 3 back then, but I'm not going to digress into that. When I rolled for his percentile strength, I got incredibly lucky, and I got a 97, making his strength absolutely insane. I'm not going to go into the differences and the bonuses. This isn't a story about him, but I do want to talk about how that was so different compared to the next character I rolled, who also had an 18 strength and only enjoyed a 26. So he was an 18/26. In that character, it kind of felt like he was missing out on a lot of stuff because there was such a difference between the two. I also want to indicate that simply being a fighter is not much of a requirement. Dwarves and halflings can both be fighter thieves, and one could argue that elves and half-elves only gain the benefit of the bonus strength when they are actually a fighter, not when they are playing as a magic user or cleric or thief, thus making the fighter side more important in their role as a character. Intelligence, on the other hand, though, is frustrating, not as clear as strength. At least for me anyways. Maybe to you it's crystal clear. I don't know. Let me know in the comments down below if I just have this wrong and you see this crystal clear, and explain to me how I should see it, because I'm interested that maybe my perspective or my understanding of things versus what other people have seen. I don't want my bias necessarily to blind me to what others see. Okay, so there are 3 new areas for intelligence. There's percent chance to know any given spell. There's the minimum per level and the maximum per level. This is referring to number of spells, not necessarily the level of spells. And I'll get into that later. There is what I might consider an important information not stated here. It is codified, but the interpretation of what you do with it is not clarified beyond a point. For example, the higher a character's intelligence, the greater the chance of knowing any spell is represented by correlating percentiles, as you can see here in these stats. This is true also with minimum spells per level and the maximum spells per level. I would argue that the maximum spells per level is pretty dang clear, to be honest. Here's your limit. You cannot know more than these spells based upon your intelligence or lack thereof. You can know more or less spells. I think that's pretty good. I think also, though, it borderlines entering a sorcerer's level, not referring to a spell book, but referring to basically spells being stored in your head. So I don't know the importance necessarily of that spell. If you have a spell book, you just go and learn from, unless you do keep spells in your head and you don't require a spell book to know them. That being said, also, I think the other 2 are a bit problematic for the way I see it. I don't like the level of control it seems to want to imply, presuming that players roll percentile to see if they know a certain stat. It kind of takes away how spells are introduced into the game and puts it into the hand of arbitration that's not actually clearly defined by any metric I can find other than just percentile know of strength spell. So that would indicate that the player would pick their most favorite spell, roll that one first, and if they get it or not, then they would move on to the next spell. I think the problem is eventually you're going to run into the situation, rolling the dice enough times, having enough characters made, that someone's going to have incredibly terrible luck, and they're going to go all the way through all the spells. There's 11 in the first level, and they're not going to reach the minimum spell level. So now what? What do we do now? What happens? Does the referee go back in and pick new spells for them to know? Does the player get in there, bite at the apple, and go back into it and try and pick the spells they want again first while rolling percentile? What happens when you get second level? Do you now just know the minimum number of spells you should know at any given level? I think it takes away some of the exploration of the game and the control of the referee. I think also there's other problems, like why is it just magic users? Why is it not clerics and druids that are also listed in this book? And in the future, the illusionist, which I assume would be covered by this because it's treated as a magic user. Druids get both clerical spells and magic user spells. So to me, this seems a tad off. I don't want to interrupt the pace of the video by tearing down this in the middle of the rest of the stats. I will come back to this more with some of the corrections I have. I just wanted to protest a little bit of my frustration that I spoke about at the beginning of this stat before I moved on. This is Editor Zone. I wanted to go over something I missed in the first part. Intelligence also has a maximum level of spells. I talk about this later as a thing that should be. It actually is there specifically, basically stating if you have an 11 intelligence, you can only go up to 6 level spells, and so on, as you can see here in this chart. Now, keeping with tradition in the order of which stats are given in the 1974 books. We're going to go into wisdom and then into constitution. Neither of these have any additional bonuses given based upon the supplement 1. And the next one after that would be dexterity. This one is also a bit oddly worded. It gives a 5% chance to be missed through parries and dodge for every point of dexterity above 14. Now that's paraphrasing it. I'll get into what I think it is later. The problem we run into is that's a whole separate roll. So you get attacked, you roll to see if you miss. To me, that is bulky. I think that is needed and works well if you're using the chainmail rules. I think it shows some additional potential for survival for fighters. I think in mass combat that would be a whole lot of extra percentiles and something I wouldn't want to do. However, if you're rolling alternative combat, I think simply just improving the AC by 1, which is an even 5% per level, which works out perfectly. I think changing the terminology a little bit away from that to like defensive fighting or to like a dodge bonus, maybe like something that would be used later in other editions, makes a whole lot of sense. Parry's already a terminology that's used in man-to-man combat and in fantasy, so there again you could have language and vocabulary that's crossing over and making it a little bit more confused. So in that situation, I would just refer to as defensive fighting, which is already discussed in chainmail and is not a new concept. And I think that works pretty well. Charisma also doesn't have anything specific. It just covers the paladin right in the middle of the stat, which I have already said is an odd place to do that. TSR was still working on how to format their books and how to group things in logical ways that just lead you through the book. I think that is a fair assessment of what they were trying to do. Now, let's get to some of my changes real quick, and then we'll wrap things up. I would leave strength alone. I think they nailed it in the head. I think it's awesome. I wouldn't make any changes to that. Certainly nothing in there that is so significant that it needs a change. Intelligence, I would change the chance of learning spell into chance of learning spell, not knowing spell. And I would say that this indicates your ability to learn a spell from a scroll or another spell book, thus putting a little bit of risk like, oh, the spell's going to be destroyed if I don't know it. I failed my roll. Fireball, I can't learn it yet. We have to find another scroll of Fireball. Thus making high intelligent characters more gold efficient, having in a low intelligence characters a little bit more risky, and I don't know if we want to give you the gate spell because you might fail it. I think there's a lot of fun in that too. I think also it should be all classes, not necessarily for learning spells, but I think that an additional part of that would be you see a caster casting a spell. It's a not instant spell. It is a long spell. So is this person casting like gate, or is this person casting a heal? I think if you roll your learn spell or no spell, or let's just simply change it into a intelligence roll instead of a percentile, which I think works efficiently and very close to the original rules that were wrote in supplement 1. I think that would give you the ability to know what the spell is, and maybe whether it is a divine spell or an arcane spell. This is a new concept that's not in supplement 1, but is a change that I make to my version of the game. I think that if it is something like a teleport that's being cast, that maybe knowing something about the spell, for example, fireball is being cast, spread out and move away from each other. Teleport's being cast. There's an ivory tower with a silver thing, and there's a glow of a purple sun. Well, now I have some indication of where they've gone. Maybe I don't know where that is, but when I walk by a silver tower with a purple glow of a sun, maybe I'll understand this is where they went. I think this also could be extended out to thieves. anyone that has the ability to do it. However, I could see that you would apply negatives. So if a cleric is trying to understand an arcane spell, maybe it's a neg 2. Maybe a thief is trying to understand a spell that is above 3rd level, for example. Maybe it's neg 4. Maybe it's neg 2 for 1st through 3rd. I could see both of these type of things being applied that would make sense to the game already. I also think it's a great idea to have a maximum number of spells a caster could know if you're going to have them retain spells in their head and use the spell books to basically refresh. They still have to memorize in the morning, but they can do both the spell books or they can keep spells in their head. I think this gives additional use for things like scrolls. Like, I don't have this spell, I will learn this spell to store in my head because I don't have a new spell book to put this spell in. But this will allow me, while it's in my head, to go ahead and memorize the spell over and over. And if it's in my head, later I can turn it into a scroll or add it to my book later, if that makes sense. I also think that maximum level of spells the max level of spells should be included in this type of thing. For example, if you're rocking like a 10 intelligence, you probably should be limited to 4th level spells. I don't think you should be casting 5th, 6th, 7th, and so on. I think there is a difference. And I think that goes for both clerics and magic users and thieves who are reading scrolls. I think all those things apply to that. Personally, I love the idea that wisdom allows you to see through logical spells, and you're more resistant to manipulation and this type of stuff. So I could see bonuses to illusionary spells and enchantment based spells. While this is not a thing yet in Dungeons and Dragons, I think that the referee can make a list of spells that make a lot of sense. For example, resisting sleep, or actually having a chance to resist sleep because you have a wisdom bonus, I think makes a lot of sense. I think that charm person makes a lot of sense. There are several spells like that when you get into the illusionary ring, especially when you're talking about the illusionist. I think this bonus probably would be limited at 15 and 16, and then again at 17 and 18 it would be open to all classes. I think Constitution should be more beneficial for fighter types, as I stated in a couple videos, including a 1974 stat video that I did a few weeks ago. A thief and a cleric actually get more hit points from bonus constitution than the fighter does because they just level faster. Therefore, I would allow everyone to get up to a +2 if they have a 17 or 18 constitution, but for a fighter, I would allow them to get 1 point for every point above 14, just like dexterity, meaning at an 18 constitution, they have +4. I think that makes a lot of sense. Dexterity, I would also have it affect initiative, which you then have to add. I think keeping a D6 system and going is fine if you're going to use alternative combat. If you're using the man-to-man combat, you already have an initiative system in the weapon class. And as I stated in the weapon class video, that kind of makes that muddy and confusing, and I would not use that there specifically. However, I do think that a +1 or +2 at 15, 16, and 17, 18 for AC makes a lot of sense when using alternative combat. I would not also change that for any of the chainmail systems. I think I would leave Charisma alone. It's pretty close to being perfect from the original 1974 rules. Everyone basically greatly benefits. I would treat it as a true combination of command, beauty, and presence and appearance, with one of these standing out maybe more than others, giving them the ability to have RP moments where they could benefit against NPCs that maybe are more or less susceptible to one of those 4. So, for example, if you have 15, I would put whatever your top ability is, like presence or command or whatever. And then if you ran into someone who had the interlocking piece, and you would maybe get a bonus in addition to that, because they're susceptible to really strong appearance people or beauty people. And I know that command and presence are very similar, and beauty and appearance are very similar. I think that people understand there are slight differences between those two. You know, for example, my wife would be susceptible to a deep voice, which is for a quirky example. In closing, I believe that stats should not be separated by gender. I think this was a mistake of the late 70s, early 80s. I think that the beauty stat or score, whatever you want to call it, that came out in Dragons magazine and later in AD&D first edition, where they had strength differences between men and women, is a mistake in my opinion. This is a fantastical world where we get to play things that are not real life. I don't think that this should be taken into consideration at all. I mean, we're casting fireballs and healing from axe wounds in combat, and we don't have any lingering effects that we just got done being at near death. I have scars and this type of stuff in my game, but I purposely treat them as no lingering negative effects, just visual things that show you've been close to death. I don't think we should be questioning how they affect gender or whether a person is stronger or not based upon their gender. I don't think this is a thing that needs to be even considered. I think beauty could be a stat. I just think that if we do it, we need to understand it's not specifically based around a gender, and we need to be careful with our vocabulary in these. Anyways, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Did I get anything right? Did I get anything wrong? Let me know down in the comments. Love to hear from you guys. Keep rolling those dice and have a great day. Bye.